And if you remember the first time you went and how it felt and how nervous you were, how unsure you were about how close can you get, should you even be there? Is it right for you to be there? It was a very unusual experience, different from all other experiences. The title is Soulmates, the Romance of Attraction. We've talked a little bit about the romance of attraction, the male and female instincts, the healthy ones, the real ones, the good ones. But what is a soulmate? In order for a relationship to work, you need two fundamental conditions. Any relationship. The first condition is you have to be generous. A person who's not generous is not capable of interacting with another person in a successful fashion. Generosity means open to another person's presence, open to another person's needs. You can be generous with your money. You can be generous with your time. You can be generous with your space. You can be generous with your opinions. To have a good relationship, you need to be generous in all of the above. There are people who have very good feelings, who are very generous with their money, their time, and their space. But for some reason, they're not generous with their words. A man says to me, the other day, my wife did something so incredible. I don't know where she gets it, but she does. It's just incredible. I said, did you tell her? He says, no. So why not? No reason. He's not given to speak generously. We need to be generous in speech as well. When a person is generous, the flow that forms the bridge between one entity and another, that bridge is a healthy one. And so it makes possible a relationship. The second condition, necessary for effective relationships, is respect. And this gets very little press. People talk about being generous and nice. Very seldom do you hear in advice columns and books on relationship, you hardly ever hear about respect. Respect means dignity, allowing the other person their dignity. We sometimes hear people say, allow them their space. But what does that mean? It means allow them their dignity. If there's some area in which they don't feel comfortable, they're not so good at it, they're a little timid about it, give them that space. Don't impose yourself where you're not welcome. That's called giving them dignity. You also have to maintain your own dignity to enable them to respect you. Well, we spoke about this afternoon. It is very rare that a husband or wife respect each other after they've been intimate, inappropriately. So we spoke about what real intimacy means and what junk relationships are. If it's not real intimacy, then you have lost respect for each other. It may not be important to you, you may not be concerned with respect, you may think it's worth it, but you've lost respect because you've lost some dignity. You need to be respectful of others, of the other, and you need to maintain your own dignity. We had a Russian couple, elderly couple, who came to Minnesota from White Russia. The guy was from the old school. Back before the communists, he was the chazan in this shul. And he remained an observant Jew through it all. After a few years living in Minnesota, his wife came down with some horrible mental condition. Very difficult, very painful, very hard on the husband. And after a year, she passed away. At the Shiva, he said in Yiddish, in the typical Yiddish style of speaking, he said, to say that I was a good husband, I don't know. But I can tell you that all of our days together, I never compromised her dignity. A husband who can say that has done a magnificent job. He made it sound like it's nothing. But maintaining dignity when you live together in the same house, you gotta really be special to do that. Because we undermine each other's dignity constantly with being careless, being thoughtless, and lowering our standards. How often have you seen a couple speak to each other with such a lack of respect that you were shocked? Because you know for a fact that that same couple would never speak to a stranger the way they're talking to each other. They would never say the things they say to each other to the delivery boy, to the plumber. And yet to each other, they speak like this. It's not a question of where did the love go? It's a question of where did the decency go? Even someone you don't love, you don't talk to like that. You don't say things like that. So just a few examples. You sit down by the table with your spouse. Who gets the first portion? This is the traditional way of doing it. You put the plate in front of the husband, and he serves his wife first. Just dignity. You never call your spouse from across the house, from a different room. You don't summon each other. You don't talk to each other from a distance. You have something to say, come over and say it. Don't shout it from another room. It's not dignified. It's not respectful. If you have generosity, kindness, and respect, which is dignity, you have a good relationship. That is a solid, long-lasting, beneficial relationship. Both parties will gain from this. But it isn't necessarily a marriage. It's a relationship. In order for a good relationship to also be a marriage, you need a third ingredient. And that is sanctity. Holiness. A marriage without holiness is just a relationship. Intimacy without holiness, like we were saying this afternoon, is not the real thing. True intimacy means finding and reaching the most innocent state within yourself, and that's holiness. So without sanctity, without holiness, a good relationship will never become a marriage. To be a marriage, you have to have the element of sanctity. Now, what does sanctity mean? Anything you can buy, anything you can own, can't be sacred. If it can belong to you, if you have the rights, then it can't be sacred. Sacred means what you cannot own. You can go to Yerushalayim, you can go to the Kotel, you can go to the holiest spot, and you can daven there. You can put a note into the wall. You can't own it. You can't buy it. You can't claim to have some rights. You can go and very respectfully and reverentially do what you need to do, and then you back away. Because this is sacred. This is holy ground. And if you remember the first time you went, and how it felt, and how nervous you were, how unsure you were about how close can you get, should you even be there? Is it right for you to be there? It was a very unusual experience, different from all other experiences. The second time, the third time, the fourth time, maybe that started to wear off a little. Especially when you notice these guys with their chairs leaning against the wall having lunch. Kind of dampens the enthusiasm a little. It's a little too familiar. A little too familiar. Sanctity does not allow familiarity. One of the violations that goes on constantly in relationships between men and women in our society, in American society, is the familiarity. A man gets to know a woman, they go to dinner once, lunch the next day, he expects some intimacy. Come on, this is our second date. There's a comedian who says, nobody thinks of being intimate after one date. Come on, we're not animals. Not after the second date, you hardly know the guy. After the third date, now that you know him, what do you know about him? That he knows how to get to where the date is? So there is a certain entitlement that mostly men feel. You spent some time together? You paid the bill in the restaurant? Okay, now you deserve. Now you're entitled to some intimacy. Of course, that's not true. How about after 10 dates? Still not true. How about after being engaged? Still not true. Okay, fine, let's get married. Then you're married and you discover that it's still not true. You have no rights, you have no ownership, you have no privileges, you can't demand, you can't expect, ever, never, even after 50 years of being married. Intimacy in marriage, the relationship between husband and wife, is a sacred one. Sacred means you can't own it. It'll never be yours, not even a tiny bit. So the feeling of entitlement is the opposite of the feeling of sanctity. So sanctity means this relationship is not something we put together. Want to marry me? I want to marry you. Okay, we agree. Now let's do it. That's not marriage. That's not marriage. That's just an agreement. Marriage is something bigger than the two of us. Marriage is something God invented and expects us to share. But to own it, it's not a human idea. It's a divine idea. And the arrangement or the rules that govern this relationship have to be divine. If they're just human, then you don't have a marriage. You just have a roommate. And you can have a very good roommate and be a very good roommate and live happily ever after. But that's not a marriage. So to make it a marriage, you need the third ingredient called sanctity. And sanctity means you can't own it. If you enjoyed this conversation or this topic, and you're looking for more information, or you want to hear it again from another angle, there is a way to do that. And that is in this book. It's all there. Order it from Amazon. You can read it, reread it, and share it.